A wild day in the markets. You know why. Iran, there is a war going on in the Middle East. I covered this whole thing over the weekend, made my opinion clear and my predictions. And even though it's not confirmed yet that I was right, it seems the market has adopted the same stance as I did. Because what we did see today was a huge turnaround from a market that dropped very significantly, nearly 2%, and then a complete turnaround, a rebound, that in the end led to even gains for stocks like Nvidia, Tesla, and so on and so forth. So it was a pretty wild ride. If you look at the S&P here, we see it ended neutral, a little bit even in the green after a dramatic turnaround. Look at this. This is the daily chart. It started in the morning, deep in the red, all the way down here, started to actually recover, and then went all the way neutral. So pretty crazy, and we have to discuss what happened there. We also want to review last week's performance of Pioneer Alpha, of my portfolio. So you know I shared every single week. And then put it in context, what happened today and what happens next week and the rest of March, in my opinion, and how I position the portfolio to be ready for a potential inflection point in Tesla in April, or a lack thereof, and an inflection point in the market, because you know that, in my opinion, we are flatlining for too long now. The AI story is reinvigorated now, or is in the process of reinvigorating. I think Nvidia gave us a little bit of a taste, and I think the crazy sell-off last week after Nvidia earnings of Nvidia and the rest that actually hit me in my portfolio, you will see it in a second. I think that was the beginning of the end of the micro bear market, because you can be irrational only for so long, and this peak in irrationality last week that left everyone stunned, the Nvidia drop that dragged down the entire market, that was reversed today of all days, in the middle of a war in Iran that has not been resolved yet. So these are all very strong indicators, and we will look at some other indicators why I believe we might be now at the inflection point for the market to get back to its senses a little bit and continue the AI rally with Nvidia, the other Mag 7s, and maybe even Tesla. So before we go into the details, let's take a look at the news situation. Quick summary. We are not going too deep into that. I did it over the weekend. As you know, to repeat, I outlined the macro situation. I outlined my take on the Middle East. Bottom line is, first principles, Trump can absolutely not afford this war to escalate. He cannot send troops in. He knows it would be his end, because a huge part of MAGA and America First is militantly opposed to this war. So his only way out, to cater to both sides, to Israel, to the arms lobby, the hawks in the GOP, on the one side that want the war, and the oil lobby, of course, and on the other side, the America First and part of MAGA, who say this is ridiculous, no more foreign wars, is to give the war hawks the war, and then win and finish it quickly to give the other side peace. So that's his only way out, and I predicted that's why this war will not last long. In addition to that, Trump achieved a major victory over the weekend with the killing of the supreme leader and a bunch of Iranian bosses. So he already achieved everything he can achieve in a short period of time, and we reached a local maximum, that's how I call it. We already achieved more than he could have expected. And from here on, it's just going to go downhill. The return on war is going to go downhill. So there is no incentive for him to hold it up. The Iranians are also in big trouble. Of course, Trump cannot just say, I'm going to end the war. He has to pretend he's going to go on, scare the other side, go back to the negotiation table as quickly as possible. That's clearly the plan. And I think there's a reasonable chance that he's going to pull it off. So the market seems to agree with me. That's why we see this major turnaround after the scare in the morning. The news are not that interesting on the war. We basically see a bunch of things happening here. There is no indication that the war is ending. There is another service member that lost his life today. So fourth, count is now 4. Iran is not backing down for now. They're saying, they're of course pissed a little bit, and that's the situation. So on the fact news level, there is no indication that this war is over, but on the first principle level, I'm pretty sure this can't last very long, and market seems to agree. Okay, so before I go into what that means for me and how I position myself, let's go and review last week. So last week for Pioneer Alpha, for my portfolio, where we build a capital foundation for the pioneers, you know all about it, where I'm trading a portfolio across a Tesla core position, but also tactically looking at other AI stocks, currently having a Robinhood position, significant Robinhood position after it went down. Actually, before it went down, before earnings, so it hit me a little bit. I lost 1% on Alpha through the Robinhood trade, but I don't regret anything. I think this is going to pay off very nicely. And today, I already had some good Alpha added through Robinhood and some other stocks, including Nvidia. Not just stocks, a lot of options too. So Nvidia, today I put in the position, I will explain in a second. But last week, what's the summary here? I underperformed. The first week this year where I underperformed Tesla. Tesla is down 0.59% last week. I was down 2.27%. So that is a negative alpha of 1.68%, and that brings me over the year to only 4.63% alpha over Tesla. So of course portfolio is down, but Tesla is down much more. And if you are TSLA holders, you know it's all very bad. It's down 20% this year. This is a dangerous thing, the TSLA. But my alpha is shrinking a little bit with this bad week. So to put it in context, I have a pretty good betting average this year. This was week number 8 that was negative. I had another week of neutral performance or insignificant alpha and 6 weeks of winning. So these 6 weeks of winning give me my 4.6% over Tesla. The way to think about this is, since Tesla is the absolute core position, my objective is to keep outperforming Tesla, and with that, of course, dramatically outperform the market over time. That has worked very nicely. As you all know, since inception, we're up 86% with an alpha of 21% over Tesla. 21% higher performance than Tesla over the last 2 years since January 2024. And you know how this looks like with the S&P and so on. S&P, we outperformed by 40% over the entire time since inception. NASDAQ, we outperformed by 37%. So what that means, alpha, is the NASDAQ is up 48%, our portfolio is up 86%, which outperforms NASDAQ by 37%. So that's the situation. Even on a 6-month scale, we are looking, of course, very good, beating Tesla dramatically. I'm very proud of that. 66% over Tesla and all kinds of other people. So I'm not going to go too deep into it. The bottom line is that it was a losing week. Not the worst of things that happens. Alpha churn, my short put selling strategy, is responsible for most of these gains. Longer term, there was also the alpha, the leap roll strategy in there, where we roll stocks into leaps when Tesla goes really down, rolling stocks into leaps, long-term call options, rolling back into stocks when we hit a high. Of course, you need to understand where the low and the high is. That's the magic of it, and then execute. But over the last 3 months at least, it was mostly alpha churn, the short selling of out-of-the-money puts and sometimes out-of-the-money calls. More rare when we hit the upper end of the trading channel. And sometimes, of course, alpha churn backfires. And that's exactly what happened last week. The reason for that performance was very simple. I was doing tremendously well, absolutely winning all the way to Nvidia earnings. And then when Nvidia surprisingly went down, even though I predicted it could go down, what I did not predict, I predicted they will blow earnings out of the water. They will actually beat the already very positive expectations. It was very clear to me. I anticipated that Nvidia could sell off. That's why I didn't hold any Nvidia. But I did not anticipate Nvidia blowing out earnings and then the market crashing a little bit. And so this giant Nvidia crash dragged down the entire market, dragged down Tesla surprisingly more than I expected. That's when it hit me on Thursday and Friday, and that's the result. That's why we are down 2% last week. So it happens. It's part of the alpha churn game. And, it's to be expected. If we can keep that batting average, you can do the math. We are in now 2 months. If you multiply this with 6, interestingly enough, if you multiply this with 6, you're actually ending up in the mid-20s. So you're ending up exactly at the alpha that we are generating long term, but annually. So we would be ahead. So it's not too bad. Let's see. And this week looks very good. So what I'm doing this week, so today was already a good starting point of the week. I'm using my macro analytics for having some conviction that the Iran conflict is not our problem for now. Of course, we have to observe it very closely, but for now, it's not our problem. I would bet on this being resolved quickly. Today, the market agreed with me. The turnaround happened fast. Let's put Iran and macro to the side. Or not macro, Iran to the side, geopolitics, and look at the rest. Because today I did something very important, repositioning. As you also know, another theme of the videos over the last few weeks was I am skeptical about Q1 for Tesla. Tesla is in a position where it can hit air gaps, and it's doing so constantly, as I also predicted in December when we were at 490. I said, I don't see how Q1 has any catalyst for Tesla. It's going to be tough. In addition to that, NASDAQ shows weakness, goes sideways, right? You know all about it. That NASDAQ, when you really look at it, is in a sideways movement. I also cover this all the time and say, look, we are in this weird sideways movement in the NASDAQ with this indecisive situation. So we did go nowhere since September 22nd last year. We are nearly completely flat since then because of that AI scare that the market say it might be a bubble, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But that's what they think. And I also showed you the chart long term. I believe we are on this uptrend here that is right now underperforming. So if you continue the trend, you see we should be here, but we are here, right? If you just draw this trend line, okay. Why do I continue this trend line? Because everything is ultra bullish. AI is exploding, is changing the world. It's boosting productivity. And we see the biggest CapEx in history, driven by the biggest cash inflow and productivity growth in history. And on the ground, left and right, you see that everything gets revolutionized. If you know anything about business and look what people actually do. Look at Lovable, look at all the vibe coding, look at Claude Code and everything. It's crazy. This is the most substantiated mega bull market I've ever seen. But the stock market is lagging behind, and it can only do that for so long. But for now, we are in that sideways movement, which is not good for Tesla, because Tesla, in addition to that, doesn't have any catalysts upcoming in the next 4 weeks. Maybe not even in the next 8 weeks, right? That is the big question. Is April the robo-taxi inflection point or not? I've predicted for a long time that it is, but we need to always readjust the predictions. First of all, I'm pretty sure it's not much. So for 4 weeks, we just, I don't know what's going to happen. And then in April, of course, we're running into enormous questions and risks. What if they can't get the inflection point done? What if they have to push it another month and another month? I don't think Tesla is going to push it for too long. And I think once Tesla gets to the inflection, we know what happens. It's basically unlimited TAM. It could 10-fold, 20-fold, and so on, the free cash flow of the company, the robo-taxi business alone. I'm not talking optimist. You know the whole bull case. I'm super bullish on Tesla, but tactically and short term, we need to get our alpha done. And short term, I'm not very bullish for much for Tesla. Now, what does it all mean? In addition to me not being bullish on Tesla, I'm very bullish on Nvidia. Because Nvidia, why does it show Tesla? When it clicks on Nvidia, let's just reload it. Nvidia is just completely killing it. And with Nvidia, after this earnings call, absolutely crazy. it should be at 210, but it dropped instead, which means huge buy signal. So in this situation where we don't know if the Nasdaq is turning around or not, Nvidia has much less downside risk than Tesla because Nvidia is now hitting a real floor. Nvidia as a company growing at 70% earnings, which is insane, every year, and it will keep growing like that. That is my very clear prediction, which means the stock price has to adjust. This is a forward earning of 22 or 20, depending how you count. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So this has a real floor in, and that means while Tesla has a much higher upside than Nvidia in terms of multiple of the current price, it also has a much higher risk because it doesn't have any floor. With Nvidia, we are in the middle of the forcing function. Not as crazy as the Tesla forcing function once it kicks in, but as a forcing function that is currently active and where we are close to the floor, to the logical floor. Even in a market crash, you can't drop this company much more. It's too much cash coming in and the price is too low. So Nvidia, while not as much upside as Tesla, has much lower risk, which allows us in a sideways market with a little bit of risk remaining in the Nasdaq to reposition ourselves to push more into Nvidia. And that's exactly what I did today. I kept my Robinhood position always. It was very productive today. And I took some stakes off the table on my Tesla position. I'm basically reduced Tesla down to my core position. No leverage, no relative leverage to the core position. And I took on a very significant Nvidia position because I do not see how Nvidia does not get back to 200 very soon. Now, of course, if the market turns around, we know that Tesla has a high beta. We know that Tesla is a momentum stock. So could Tesla turn around in March? Of course. But the risk reward for Nvidia looks much better. So I am positioning myself strongly in Nvidia in the discretionary part of the strategy. There's a non-discretionary part where I'm still 80% of the entire thing is in Tesla because you can't play around with Tesla too much. We know what happens when it happens. But for generating alpha, Nvidia is my game right now. Let's see if it plays out. Of course, Robinhood also, by the way, looking very good. Let's get into my expectations for March, because there are actually some very interesting indicators here that I want to point out. Let's take a step back. Let's go to CNBC and let's go to up here markets and think about a little bit what we are seeing. So the first big indication that the market, the bears, the irrational AI bears are getting very exhausted is that we saw that turnaround today. Because think about it. Think about the turnaround. This is a turnaround. It ends green on a day where we are in the middle of a new war against Iran that is still escalating. Of course, everyone watches Joe's channel and knows what's really going on. So people have a certain optimism about the situation, and I'm very likely right. But still, the evidence on the ground does not support my theory yet. The fact that the Nasdaq turns around like this, the S&P turns around like this, shows me one thing, that the market, the sellers, are exhausted. If you can't even get a red day in the middle of a fresh war in the freaking Middle East, it means the sellers are incredibly exhausted. And it could be that this Nvidia sell-off was the last little attempt to drop stocks. Because they are selling against the grain. They are selling against the mega trend of AI. They're selling against an economy, at least the tech part of the economy, that's going through the roof and will never end going through the roof because of intelligence. So this is a good indication that maybe we have reached the bottom finally. Maybe we have reached the bottom. And I want to show you something else. Boom. On this little thing, crypto. That was already visible on Friday. Look at Bitcoin. You see this thing is turning around plus 6%. Are you kidding me? So you know that crypto had a huge sell-off and was bottoming around 6. 60,000, as you see here, right? Huge sell-off. Let's go to 3 months. It was a huge sell-off. Well, let's go 6 months from the peaks. It peaked here, Bitcoin, at this unbelievable $125,000, and then here had some major crisis. Where's the time here? In November, there was all kinds of speculations, but there were some blow-ups on the leverage side. Some big players went out of business. And since then, this is weakened. There's a huge outflow of money from retail and some big retail whales, while institutions are coming in. So for crypto, I'm actually very bullish. You see a rotation from retail into, the bigger institutional market. So this whole ecosystem gets beefed up, and Ethereum, don't get me started, Ethereum really becomes the rails of the future financial system, of the AI-driven system. All the big banks, everyone is building on Ethereum. It's huge. And Bitcoin, of course, as the big leader, benefits too. But at the same time, while this is happening, while this massive crypto expansion is happening, massive institutional, adoption happening, the price is going down like crazy. And then there was this huge sell-off around beginning of February, all the way down to 60,000. Since then, we are bottoming out. I don't want to go into some crypto analysis, but there is reason to believe that 60,000 is actually a logical bottom, because that is actually what happened here in 2024, right? The last time it went sideways was around the 60,000. So we know there's some resistance going on, and there's this base building with all these institutions. Doesn't matter. Long story short, the fact that in the last 5 days you saw this here, this was actually happening. Here was the drop. Here's the attack on Iran. See this? Dropping from 65,500 all the way down to, at the bottom here, it was pretty steep crash to 63,200. But then right away, on Saturday, this thing went up like crazy again, which was a very interesting indication that also was part of my rationale to very quickly, to be the first one on YouTube to actually say this war will end very quickly. I said it on Saturday. I repeated it yesterday with a more in-depth analysis, but now this went even higher. So if you believe that crypto has some form of lead indication here for risk assets, that is another indication that we might see a turnaround now in the NASDAQ. So I am getting a little more bullish on this scenario, which is also, if that happens, Nvidia will be the main obvious beneficiary. Tesla will just jump around a little bit, but it will be an Nvidia game we are playing. That's why I'm bullish on this thing. So that is the situation that I'm seeing. That is why I'm repositioning more towards Nvidia, while retaining, of course, my Tesla core position as always. So I'm prepared for what is coming here, Iran or March. I'm basically de-risking, looking for an asset that, if things go up, will lead the rally back, which is Nvidia. An asset that has a much better floor than Tesla, which is Nvidia. While, of course, keeping my Tesla core position and tracking very closely what's happening with robotaxis. On Tesla, I will have a video this week what the strategy is with Tesla, but we have to just be aware that Tesla is a hugely risky play for the next, 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, however long it takes to reach that inflection point. And risk, by the way, goes in both directions. You don't want to be super long, in my opinion, like leveraged long as you can't see the exact inflection. And you want even less to be short, because if it happens, it's game over. So we need to watch Tesla, but I'm not up for sitting around and slowly losing money. That's not how we generate alpha. That's why the Nvidia is the play for now on the discretionary part. So I hope that was interesting. We wish, of course, everyone, all service members of the United States. 2 more. That's bad. While we were talking. So we wish everyone, all the luck in the world. That's what they need right now. That, we lose as little lives as possible in that conflict. We keep covering the whole situation and monitoring it while taking the right actions here to make sure our portfolios keep going up. I hope that was interesting. See you very soon.